Ah, welcome. I saved you a spot, but you'll have to fight me for the last of the honeyed chicken. A peacock. Now that's what I call a strategic objective. The best part of any party isn't the wine. It's the intelligence report. He's just resting his eyes. Debating the budget for aqueduct maintenance is exhausting work. Gods, the music is terrible. Come on, my study has better wine, and I'll explain everything. Ah, welcome. Come in, make yourself comfortable. For those of you who are new here, my name is Decimus Bibulus. By day, the Senate pays me to be a Centurion. By night, I tell stories. Not the heroic nonsense they carve into arches, but the real, messy, and frankly, far more interesting truth. Tonight, forget glorious battles. We're talking about something far more dangerous, a Roman dinner party. It's a world of deadly politics and absurd food, where the main course is often betrayal. We'll cover an emperor who joked about slitting throats at the table, another who married his boy bride, and a dish made from 600 ostrich brains. This is the real story of the banquet. So pour some wine. You'll need it. Right, let's get this straight. We don't sit at tables like some hunched-over barbarian from Germania gnawing on a boar's leg. No, we are civilized, which means we recline. We do it in a formal dining room called a Triclinium. The name, like most of our better ideas, is stolen from the Greeks and means 3 couches. These couches, or lecti, are arranged in a U-shape around a low table, the mensa. The 4th side is always kept open, which is supposed to be for the slaves to serve us. In reality, it's an escape route for when your host's uncle starts telling that story about his gout again. Now listen closely, because this is the most important part, and getting it wrong can cost you more than just a bad meal. Where you recline is everything. It's a physical map of how important you are, or more accurately, how important your host thinks you are. The host, the dominus, usually lies on the lowest couch, on the right. It gives him a perfect view of the room and lets him bark orders at the servants without spilling his wine. Right next to him, on the middle couch, lie the most honored guests. They get the best view, the first crack at the food, and they get to laugh at the host's terrible jokes. And the least important people? Well, we put them on the highest couch, furthest from the action. It's the social equivalent of being told to sit at the children's table. Believe me, making a mistake in this seating plan is a grave insult. It's worse than showing up to a triumph in last season's armor. I once saw a senator nearly have a fit because he was placed 1 spot lower than he thought he deserved. He sulked for the entire evening. It was wonderful. So what's on the menu, you ask? A proper cena, that's our word for dinner, has several stages, each designed to be more pretentious than the last. We start with the gustatio, the appetizers. Sure, you'll get your olives, your eggs, a bit of salad, but if your host is truly fashionable and wants to show off, prepare yourself for stuffed dormice. Yes, you heard me. We have these special clay jars where we fatten up the little rodents in the dark with nuts until they're nice and plump. Then we bake them with honey and poppy seeds. It's a delicacy, apparently, a status symbol, to prove you'll eat anything if it's expensive enough. Personally, I'd rather eat my own sandal, but you have to smile and pretend you love it, or you risk offending your host. And an offended host with a lot of money is a dangerous thing. After you've choked down your rat, the main event arrives, the prima mensae. And this is where it becomes a ridiculous competition. It's not enough to just serve a simple roast pork. Gods no. You have to serve something your guests will be talking about for weeks, something that proves you have more money than sense. We're talking about peacock brains, flamingo tongues marinated in honey, and I've even seen a sow's uterus served at a party. Some hosts even serve meat from animals you've never seen, like giraffes, shipped all the way from Africa at enormous expense. It's less about the taste and more about showing everyone that you can afford to be truly, deeply weird. And don't think I'm making this up. That old busybody Pliny the Elder wrote about all this stuff in his encyclopedia. The man documented everything. He must have been the most annoying guest at every party, pointing at the food and taking notes. But thanks to him, we know that some rich fools really did pay a fortune for flamingo tongues. For drink, there is, of course, always wine. But we're not savages, so we mix it with water. Drinking it straight is what the Gauls do before a battle, and look where it gets them. We often sweeten our wine with honey, which we call mulsum. It makes it go down easier, which is useful, because half the time the vintage is terrible. And if, by some miracle of the gods, you still have room after all that, the meal ends with the secunda mensae, fruit, nuts, and honey cakes for dessert. That, at least, is how a normal feast is supposed to work. But as you're about to find out, things in Rome are very rarely normal, especially when the host is an emperor. Now, let me tell you what happens when your host isn't just trying to show off with weird food, but is an absolute power-mad monster. Luckily for us, these particular tyrants are already dead, but their stories serve as a useful warning. Never accept a dinner invitation from a man who thinks he's a god. It rarely ends well for the guests. Let's start with Caligula. That man was the embodiment of a bad host. For him, a feast wasn't about good food or conversation. It was about power, fear, and his own twisted amusement. That old gossip Suetonius, who collected rumors like I collect overdue taxes, wrote that Caligula found it to be the height of entertainment to have people tortured and executed near the dining couches during the meal. He called it dinner theater. Imagine trying to enjoy your stuffed dormouse while some poor soul is being flogged a few feet away. It tends to spoil your appetite. I've seen some grim things on the battlefield, but even I think that's a bit much for a Tuesday evening. His sense of humor was just as deadly. Suetonius tells a story, and this one sounds exactly like something Caligula would do, where he burst out laughing in the middle of a grand feast. The two consuls reclining next to him, terrified they'd done something wrong, nervously asked what was so amusing. Caligula looked at them with a wide grin and said, "It just occurred to me that with a single nod of my head, I could have both of your throats cut right here." I imagine the rest of the dinner was a very quiet, very tense affair. You don't ask for a second helping of wine after a joke like that. You just pray to the gods you don't sneeze. But it wasn't just about random cruelty. He used his feasts as a personal marketplace. He would regularly invite senators and their wives to the palace. As the women walked past his couch, he would critically inspect them, up and down, like a horse trader at the market. He'd poke them, comment on their posture. Then he'd pick his favorite and, without a word to her husband, lead her away to his private chambers. The husband, of course, had to just sit there pretending to enjoy the music, probably sweating through his toga. After a while, Caligula would return to the table wipe his mouth, and in front of all the other guests, give a detailed and often brutally critical review of the woman's performance in bed. He'd discuss her good points, her flaws. It's what we in the military call a morale-building exercise, except it only builds the morale of one person. It's a way of reminding everyone in the room that he not only owns the empire, he owns you. Then there was Nero. He was different, less of a sadist, more of an artist obsessed with his own megalomania. For him, a feast wasn't about cruelty, but about creating a total sense-drowning experience. After the great fire of Rome, a fire that many people whispered he started himself, he built his golden house, the Domus Aurea, on the ruins of Incir. It was a palace so vast and opulent that he himself declared, "Finally, I can begin to live like a human being." The rest of us apparently were living like ants. The crown jewel of this palace was his main dining room. According to the stories, it had a ceiling that constantly rotated, day and night, in time with the heavens. It was inlaid with ivory panels that could slide open to shower the guests below with fresh flowers and expensive perfumes. Imagine that. You're eating, and a gentle rain of rose petals drifts down from above. It sounds wonderful until you realize you're the one paying for it with your taxes. And knowing Nero, he probably used poisonous flowers for the guests he didn't like. Of course, Nero had his own scandals. He fell in love with a young boy named Sporus, who they say looked remarkably like his dead wife, Poppaea, the one he supposedly kicked to death in a fit of rage. So what does Nero do? He has Sporus castrated, dresses him in the emperor's clothes, and marries him in a public ceremony, complete with a bridal veil. He insisted everyone address the boy as empress or lady. So, while you were dining in his rotating room, you had to raise your cup and toast the emperor and his new wife. Those are the moments you find yourself thinking that a quiet life on a farm in Gaul doesn't sound so bad after all. It's hard to focus on your roasted peacock when you're trying to remember the correct pronouns for the emperor's boy bride. It was a charade, a performance designed to show that the rules of gods and men meant nothing to him. And we all had to sit there, smile, and applaud the spectacle. Because when the host is an emperor, his madness is just another form of entertainment. But don't get the wrong idea. The absurdity of these feasts isn't just about sadism and power plays. Sometimes it's about a much simpler, and in some ways, more pathetic kind of excess. Pure, unadulterated gluttony and breathtakingly bad taste. Some people in this city have so much money, they seem to be in a competition to see who can waste it in the most ridiculous way possible. Take our former emperor Vitellius. That man's entire legacy, the only thing anyone remembers about his short, disastrous reign, was his appetite. His life was one long, continuous feast. The stories say he held at least 3, sometimes 4, lavish banquets a day. He'd have breakfast with one senator, lunch with another, and dinner with a third. And each of these meals was a full-blown production. And how did he manage it? Well, between meals, he would induce vomiting. He'd tickle his throat with a peacock feather to make room for the next course. A peacock feather. I use mine for cleaning dust out of my helmet. He used his as a tool for gluttony. It's a level of dedication I can't even comprehend. As a soldier, you learn to value every scrap of food. This man treated his stomach like a temporary storage cellar. When he returned to Rome to become emperor, his brother threw him a welcoming party, and according to the gossips, they served 2,000 choice fish and 7,000 birds. 7,000! That's more birds than my entire legion has seen in a year in Gaul. Our rations are mostly hardtack and sour wine, and this man is eating his way through an entire aviary in one evening. The sheer waste is staggering. But Vitellius, of course, had to top that himself. He commissioned a silver platter so enormous that he called it the Shield of Minerva, protector of the city. And on this platter, he had his chefs mix the most expensive and exotic ingredients they could find from every corner of the empire. There were pike livers, pheasant and peacock brains, and of course, those fashionable flamingo tongues. All of it had to be brought in by special ships and fast couriers from Hispania, from Parthia, from the British frontier. The cost of transport alone must have been enough to fund a small campaign, or at least buy some decent wine for the troops for once. All for a single dish, a monument to his own greed. And it's not just the emperors. This kind of foolishness trickles down. The newly rich, the nouveau riche, are the worst. They see what the emperor does, and they try to copy it, usually with spectacularly tasteless results. There's a popular book making the rounds in Rome right now, the Satyricon, written by a fellow named Petronius. He used to be Nero's arbiter of taste, which basically means he was a professional snob, paid to have opinions. So he knew a thing or two about bad taste. In his book, he describes a dinner party hosted by a man named Trimalchio. He's a former slave who struck it rich, and now he's desperate to prove he belongs with the old aristocracy. He's the perfect example of a man with more money than sense. His feast is one long, cringe-worthy disaster. Everything is a gimmick. One course is a huge platter with food arranged to look like the 12 signs of the zodiac. It sounds clever until you realize you're eating chickpeas on Aries and a piece of beef on Taurus. It's absurd. But his masterpiece of bad taste was the main course. A massive roasted pig is brought to the table. Trimalchio complains that the cook forgot to gut it and pretends he's going to have the man flogged right there. But then, the cook slices the pig open, and instead of guts, a flock of live thrushes flies out, flapping around the dining room and, I assume, leaving little droppings on the guests. The slaves then have to run around with nets to catch them. Everyone is supposed to be amazed and delighted. But really, what are you proving? That you can afford to have birds flying around your dining room making a mess? That's not luxury, that's just poor planning. It's the kind of thing that only seems like a good idea to a man who has never had to clean up after himself. It's a charade, a desperate, loud, and frankly pathetic attempt to buy respect. But respect, like taste, can't be bought. You either have it or you serve your guests a pig full of birds. And while we're on the subject of wastefulness, let's clear something up. I'm sure you've heard the stories, the ones about us Romans having a special room, a vomitorium, designed for us to be sick in so we can go back and eat more. That is, and I say this with all the authority of a man who has seen his fair share of nonsense, complete and utter foolishness. It's a myth, probably invented by someone who has never been to a real Roman feast and thinks we're all like Vitellius. The word, vomitorium, is real, but it has nothing to do with food. It's an architectural term. It refers to the large exits in our amphitheaters and theaters. They're designed to vomit the crowd out into the streets after the show is over. It's about crowd control, not gluttony. Now, am I saying that no Roman has ever made himself sick to keep eating? Gods no. A degenerate like Vitellius certainly did. But it was seen for what it was, a sign of absolute moral decay. It wasn't standard practice. Most of us value our food, especially those of us in the army who have spent months living on hardtack that could break your teeth. The idea of willingly throwing up a good meal is offensive. The real waste, the truly obscene part, isn't in the vomiting, it's in the price. Let me tell you a story about Cleopatra. She made a bet with Mark Antony that she could spend 10 million sesterces on a single dinner. Antony, like the fool he was when it came to her, took the bet. So, during the feast, she takes one of her enormous pearl earrings, one of the largest in the world apparently, drops it into a cup of vinegar, waits for it to dissolve, and then drinks it. 10 million sesterces. Let me put that into perspective for you. A legionary's annual salary is about 900 sesterces. That woman drank the equivalent of more than 11,000 years of a soldier's pay in a single gulp for a bet. When I hear stories like that, it makes me wonder why we bother conquering anything. We send men to die in some miserable, rain-soaked forest in Germania, also a queen in Egypt can drink her jewelry. It's absurd. And the ingredients these people demand, it's a constant competition to find something more expensive and more pointless to eat. Our recent emperor, Heliogabalus, that Syrian boy who thought he was the sun god, once had 600 ostriches killed. Not for the meat, which is actually quite good. Now, he had them killed just for their brains, which he had made into a single dish. 600 animals slaughtered for a plate of mushy brains. I've seen less waste on a battlefield after a major engagement. But the real price of all this luxury, the true cost that isn't measured in sesterces, is paid by the slaves. For most Romans, a slave is just property, a speaking tool, as the law puts it. They are part of the furniture, but they are the ones who make this entire charade possible. They cook the food, they pour the wine, they clean up the mess, and they live in constant fear. There's a law, an old and brutal one. It states that if a slave murders his master, every slave in that household must be executed. Every single one. The old man who serves your wine, the young girl who cleans your room, the cook who has been with the family for 30 years, all of them put to death. It doesn't matter if they were involved. It doesn't matter if they even knew about it. It's a tool of terror designed to ensure that no slave ever even thinks about raising a hand against his master. So imagine that. You're a slave at one of these feasts. Your master is a cruel, unpredictable man who might have you flogged for spilling a drop of wine. You're surrounded by his powerful, arrogant friends, and you know that your life hangs by the thinnest of threads. One wrong move, one angry word from your master, or one desperate act from a fellow slave, and your life is over. That is the terrifying reality that hides behind every gilded couch and every silver platter. All this luxury, all this magnificent excess is built on a foundation of human misery. And that, more than anything else, is the true price of the party. So, there you have it. The Roman feast, a stage for power, a theater of cruelty, and breathtakingly bad taste. In the end, these parties are just like Rome itself. Grand on the outside, but inside a mess of intrigue and decay, hurtling towards an awful hangover. And luckily for me, I'll have a front row seat. There are countless stories like this they don't carve on monuments. If you'd rather hear about scandals than speeches, the easiest way to make sure you don't miss our next chat is to subscribe. And I'm genuinely curious. What's the most absurd thing you've ever eaten? I could use a good laugh after all this talk of flamingo tongues and stuffed dormice. Let me know in the comments below this video. See you next time. And try not to get invited to any imperial banquets.